What's going on, everybody? Connor here. I think it's no secret that the next couple weeks are going to be really crucial for some of the professional leagues currently with their seasons on pause to figure out how they're going to resume and hopefully finish their seasons. Looking specifically at the NBA, the MLB, and the NHL. The NHL put out an expanded playoff proposal yesterday. MLB and NBA still working on figuring out what they're going to do moving forward. And the NBA is thinking about all these different ideas for, do we come back? Do we do a 66-game regular season, 72-game regular season, 76-game regular season? Do we go straight to the playoffs? If so, how do we do the playoffs? Thinking about a lot of different ideas and making a lot of different proposals that are going to have to be worked out over the next few days and weeks. One of these ideas that I thought was really cool was an article that Kevin O'Connor of The Ringer published yesterday, and I'll throw the link to this article in the description. Title of the article, Why the NBA Could and Should Look More Like the World Cup. And here he advocates one of the ideas he's heard being floated around, for a group stage in the first round of the playoffs, similar to how it happens in the World Cup and a lot of soccer tournaments, and in the Olympics, I guess, with FIBA and stuff like that. So I wanted to kind of go more in depth on this idea, kind of show you guys through the article and talk about some of the pros and cons. Overall, I think this is a really cool idea. I would love to see it being used this year. It's probably my favorite of the ideas that I have heard, but that doesn't mean it doesn't also have some of its downsides. So I want to talk about some of the pros and the cons here with you guys today. And I'm having a really bad thunderstorm as I'm speaking, so if you guys hear any of that rain and thunder, I apologize for that. We're going to get right into the idea itself. So basically, the idea for this first round, basically, we take the 16 teams that are currently in the playoffs and the 4 teams with the next best records that are currently not in the playoffs. So in that case, that would be the Portland Trail Blazers, the New Orleans Pelicans, Sacramento Kings, and Spurs. So we take those 20 teams and we seed them into 5 different pools, okay? So what we do is we take the top 2 teams in the West and the East, and they're Pool 1. Then we take the 3 and 4 seeds in the West and the East, they're Pool 2. 5 and 6 seeds, Pool 3. 7 and 8 seeds, Pool 4. And then we have our 5th pool of those 4 teams that I just described, that are the 4 closest teams to being in the playoffs, right? And they become Pool 5. So then what we do is we take a draw and we make 4 groups, right? So we take 1 team from each pool. So in theory, the group should be relatively balanced. And we make 4 different groups of 5 teams, okay? And then in this proposal, we do a double round robin for the first round of the playoffs. So each team plays every other team in their groups 2 times for a total of 8 games for each team. And then we take the top 2 finishers from each group, so that would be the top 8 teams overall, and then we transition into a more traditional NBA playoff format, basically like we're starting at the conference semis. We have 8 teams, and then we play down to a champion, again, in some 7-game series. Right, so that's the general gist of the idea. I'm going to show you guys in the article, there's a sample of how the groups would be a potential group draw. So obviously here you see the 5 tiers. Top Bucks and Raptors, the top 2 seeds in the East. Lakers and Clips, the top 2 seeds in the West. And again, 3 and 4 seeds, 5 and 6 seeds, 7 and 8 seeds. And then these 4 teams here closest to currently making the playoffs, right? So as you can see in a possible group stage draw like the one we're looking at right now, the groups all look fairly balanced. I think I would probably say, and I think most of us would agree, that Group 4 is probably the weakest group overall. But again, all 4 of them pretty close. And I think of these 3 groups, I think you can take your pick at which one is the strongest overall. I think probably this group here, Lakers, Heat, Rockets, has the strongest top 3 teams. So one of those 3 teams at least would not be able to make it, and you still got lingering teams like the Pelicans that could be dangerous. In Group 1, I think this is the deepest group. I think all 5 teams here are really good. And then here in Group 3, the Mavericks, being just a Tier 4 team, I think makes this group incredibly dangerous. So that's just kind of one way this could shake out. Before we really get into the pros and cons, I do want to acknowledge the fact that, Obviously, all of this is contingent on us being able to play NBA games and us being able to finish out the season. There's still a lot that has to go down before we can, make this happen. We need the players and the owners to kind of agree on a proposal. And then, of course, with all the coronavirus stuff, we need to have testing every day on these players. We need to have them as isolated as possible. There's a new article that came out today from Ramona Shelburne and Woj on ESPN that was saying a few family members for each team, for each player, might be able to be kind of quarantined with them while they're playing out this tournament. But I think people really underestimate how many people are going to be required to pull this off, because not only are we talking about the players, we're talking about, the coaches and the training, the trainers, and, each team's going to have a certain amount of people they're allowed to bring. But beyond that, again, family members. There's going to be, if we're doing this at Disney World, there's going to have to be some employees of Disney World. We're going to have the referees. We're going to have the broadcast crews, possibly some journalists. There's going to be a lot of people that are going to have to be involved to pull this off. I think a lot more than any of us are really anticipating. And if any one of these people contracts COVID-19, or especially if a player does, then there's going to have to be a whole different set of precautions. Do we just end the season? I don't know. So there's a lot of things to just talk through. And certainly, I don't think any proposal is going to be perfect at this point. But, there's an estimated $900 million riding on the NBA finishing this season. So obviously, and if they don't get that money, it impacts salary caps moving forward, stuff like that. So it's really important that the NBA, from a financial standpoint, at least tries to throw something together. And since they will try to throw something together, we're going to assume that everything runs smoothly with this plan, and we're going to try to talk about the pros and the cons of it. Okay. So for me, I think one of the strongest pros to this new system with the group stage in the first round is that it does accommodate everyone that was reasonably close to the playoffs, right? So there was, obviously here, if we're looking at the Western Conference, Memphis, 32-33 right now. They have a 3.5 game lead on that 8th playoff seed. But they had the toughest remaining schedule, while teams like the Pelicans, I think, might have had the easiest remaining schedule. So, with about 15 games left to play, there were still a lot of uncertainties. Not as much, obviously, as you can see in the Eastern Conference with who would make the playoffs ultimately. But definitely this was something to think about in the Western Conference, where we wanted to make sure that we really got, the teams that were deserving of making the playoffs into the playoffs. But with this system, every team that was within 5 games of a playoff spot is now in the playoffs. So I think that kind of range of, they could have reasonably worked their way into the playoffs. All those teams that had a chance will now be able to play. And, you're not going to be able to say that things are unfair because, we didn't get our 82 games. We didn't get our chance, etc. So I think that's a really good format that it helps accommodate all those teams that were close to the playoffs. I think, obviously, every match is going to feel super important. There's a lot of best of sevens, where you see these 1 seed versus 8 seed matchups. I mean, the Bucks versus the Magic. I don't think anyone's going to want to watch that matchup. Same with the Raptors, the Nets. There are usually a few first-round matchups in the playoffs that are just total washes that no one cares about, and then we know are going to 4-0 or maybe 4-1 in their matchups. Not the case here. Again, if we're looking at some of these matchups, each team plays 8 games. And if you're the Bucks, it's not like you have to play all 8 games against the Blazers. You're going to play the Jazz twice, the Sixers twice, the Grizzlies twice, the Blazers twice. It's pretty balanced in a way that the Bucks might be the best team, but if they slip up a couple games and maybe they only finish 5-3, well, maybe that's not enough, right? Maybe the Jazz and the Sixers both go 6-2, or maybe there's some kind of tiebreaker. I think what I've heard is that the tiebreaker, if there's a tiebreaker for, the second spot in a group, that it would go to the team with the better record in the regular season, which I think would help a team like the Bucks in this scenario. Another possibility, they could just have them play a tiebreaker game. I think that's also something that we could see happen. But in general, these teams, these better teams that, usually don't have to think too hard about their first-round matchups would really be forced to take it much more seriously, and every game would be really intense. You don't want to slip up at all, because even if you don't finish first in your group, finishing second in your group would probably mean you would have to face the first place team in another group. So if the Bucks slip up and they only finish in second place, then maybe you have and the Lakers win their group, maybe you have a quarterfinals matchup of the Bucks versus the Lakers, and that would be crazy because we think those are the two best teams in the league probably. So there's a lot of crazy things that could go on with this. We definitely would add a lot of excitement. It's not it's obviously not a single elimination tournament, but it would recreate some of that March Madness type feel. That vibe of every game is really important. You'd have people. I think the ratings for this would be incredible. If you want to talk about ratings, the ratings for a selection show for the group stage draw, I think that would be phenomenal. It'd be super hype. Kevin O'Connor talks about it be similar to the NBA draft lottery, and we know that does crazy numbers. Another thing I like about this format, no one gets an unfair advantage of warm-up games. Everyone kind of starts on the same slate. I think a lot of people have brought up the point that if we start, if we make it a 72-game regular season or a 76-game regular season, it's going to be kind of unfair because some teams will only get a few games to warm up before the playoffs. Some teams will get more games. And I think if you're using this format, everyone is on the same playing field. Everyone just starts, and all the games are meaningful. I don't think anyone would really be watching those regular season games if we were to resume with the regular season. Every game's meaningful. No team gets an advantage of being more in shape or whatever than the other teams. I think, and then by the quarterfinals, everyone's kind of up to speed, and then we're just playing best of 7 series from there. I think it's also good in this format that teams that were outside of the top 20 won't have to play. I think at this point we want to minimize the amount of teams and the amount of people in any isolated facility, as to protect against the spread of the virus, and we want to make the possibility as high as possible that everyone can be safe. And I think just the more people that you have, the more difficult it is to achieve that. And plus, if you're a team like the Warriors, I don't know what the Warriors are, like 12 and 50 something, just out of curiosity, 15 and 50. This is a team that's not going to want to play games. I think a lot of these teams at the bottom of the schedules are not really going to be that interested in playing more games for obvious reasons. They're out, so why should they bother coming back? And I think this means that these bottom 10 teams won't have to worry about any of that. I also think it allows for some unique playoff matchups. Usually you only see the Western Conference play the Eastern Conference in the finals, but here you can have multiple teams from each conference in the same group. Kevin O'Connor in the article mentions kind of a stipulation that there could not be any more than 3 Western Conference teams in a single group. So in that scenario, we kind of have 3 West and 2 East in every group, which would make things interesting. You get to see a lot more interesting matchups that you don't normally see during the regular season or the playoffs. And I think that could be really exciting than kind of seeing these same matchups over and over again in the playoffs every year. And then also, I just think the luck of the draw is fun. The idea that you won't know exactly who's going to be in your group. Again, that group draw show would be great. There's going to be 80 total games. We'd probably play this 4 or 5 games a day, so it would take 16 to 20 days, versus where the NBA's normal first round takes around 15 days. But the thing is, a lot of series in the first round of the playoffs end, 4-0, or they'll only end in 4 or 5 games. So a lot of those later games don't get played. So there's actually only an average of 44 games played in the first round traditionally in 15 days. So that's about 3 games a day. But here, if you're thinking we're going to have 4 or 5 games a day, it's more basketball. It feels more meaningful. It's more exciting. It's a new format, so everyone's going to be super excited to kind of see how it works out. And I really like it. And of course, there's no travel involved because we're all going to be isolated in a single facility. And we're playing basketball, and I think that's the most important thing, is that we're playing basketball. So I think a lot of pros with this idea. If I can touch on some of the cons now, I think a lot of people, especially in the responses to Kevin O'Connor's post, were talking about how this would lead to people putting an asterisk on the season, that if we're going to have all this COVID interrupting the middle of the season, And then if we're going to have a modified playoff format on top of it, I think a lot of people will say, well, this isn't the way we usually do things, so this season doesn't count or whatever. I really don't honestly see this argument at all. I think, people try to throw asterisks on everything these days. I think it's an excuse for when their team loses, most of all. When they say, oh, well, this team did this or whatever, so we have to put an asterisk on it. I think you only have a legitimate claim to do this if one party cheats, right? So if the Astros are cheating to win the World Series, well, then I think it's fair if you can say, okay, we might put an asterisk over this one. Or if Lance Armstrong, obviously is taking steroids to win the Tour de France, well, you can say, okay, well, this person had an unfair advantage, right? So this person or this team was cheating, and they had an unfair advantage that none of the other participants had, so it was not a fair system, right? But in this situation, it's not like one team is starting out with more wins than the other team, or, every team is playing under the same rules, right? And we can make the rules whatever we want. And just because something has been played one way in the past does not mean that it needs to continue operating in that way in the future, right? If this possible format works, we might go to it in future seasons. We might just scrap the current playoff format as a whole, and we could just do, take the best 16 records in the NBA and do 4 pods of 4 and do a similar system in future years, right? Just the fact that we had the playoffs the way they are now does not mean that they need to be this way in the future. Previously we had 5-game series in the first round. Back in the 60s, we only had 4 teams in the playoff. Do we put an asterisk on that because, well, there were only 8 teams in the league then or 10 teams in the league? No. Obviously we try to adapt and we try to make the best systems for the league that we currently have. So I think there's not any real reason to asterisk this season because everyone's playing by the same rules. No one has an unfair advantage due to COVID. No one's having more or less games to warm up to the season before this starts. I think some people are using this asterisk claim because they think that it's unfair towards the top seeds, right? And there's a little bit of an argument here that obviously the top seeds aren't going to have the home field advantage that they usually have, although no format that we do now is going to have any home field advantage because it's going to be played at a neutral site. And they're not going to be able to beat up against the 8 seeds in their conference, the 7 and 8 seeds in their conference, then just move on to the next round. Which obviously I kind of see their point there, although one really interesting idea that's been brought up is to allow kind of a draft of groups, so to allow these top teams to kind of counterbalance that fact, to choose the teams that they want to be in their groups, which in theory should give them kind of a bit of an edge if they feel like they match up better against certain teams over the other ones. That could be a way. But then again, I think we have to realize that we're trying to find an NBA champion, right? So teams shouldn't be able to just, run away from opponents. I think if this is the way that we want to do this tournament, then it makes sense that if you want to be the best, you have to beat the best. So it's not like anyone's having an unfair advantage or disadvantage. I think the odds of the Bucks or the Lakers winning the playoffs in this scenario might be a little less than in a traditional playoff format, but that doesn't mean that it's unfair towards them. I think it just means it's a different system, and they're still going to be the favored teams, and they're still going to be able to, obviously play in this system, and if they're the best teams, they should prevail. I think really what is the biggest issue with this system for me is the possibility that teams could kind of throw games at the very end of the group stage. This might not happen, but there are possibilities that a team starts, say 6-0, 7-0, 6-1, or whatever, and they've already clinched a spot in the quarterfinals. There would be no real reason for them to play their final game or two of the group stage or, really try. And there could be scenarios where teams kind of rest their starters, and that could influence, what goes on in some of the other matchups. If there's 2 teams that are tied with 1 game left, and one team has to play a team, or one team gets to play a team that's already resting their starters, where another team is playing someone that cares. And I guess this goes both ways. If a team's already eliminated, they might not be trying to, win every game either. So there's probably something we need to do about that. I think that's kind of the biggest issue for me, is that teams both that have started really well or really poorly might lose the incentive to kind of compete in later rounds of the tournament. I think we could probably do something like a flex scheduling, while like we play the first round robin, and then for the second round robin, we make sure that the final matchups, are between those teams that are kind of on the bubble. Make sure like the second and third teams in each group after one round are playing in the final game in the next round, or something like that to kind of raise the stakes. Unfortunately, it's not like the World Cup where there's 4 teams in a group, so you can play the final game for every team. You can play them simultaneously, so people aren't aware of the results of the other matchups. With 5 teams, we can't play all the final games for a group even on the same day, which is kind of tricky. So obviously, I think that's kind of the biggest issue I'm having with this format. But overall, I still think super exciting, a new way to do things. Obviously it accommodates getting 20 teams in, everybody that was within 5 games of making the playoffs. I think this would be a ton of fun, and I think this is an idea that we wouldn't really be able to try otherwise. I think one of the good things about, one of the only good things about being in this current coronavirus situation is, that it allows us to kind of think outside the box, and we're trying to make sure what's the best way we can do things, and that allows us to kind of think of more ideas and be more creative about our decision-making and our thought processes. And this kind of group stage format is not something that I think would ever really be implemented, without a trial run, and I don't think it's anything that we would ever be able to see in a normal season otherwise. So I think it'd be really cool to try this, at least for this season, and see how it goes. Obviously, there's a little bit of uncertainty with the TV deals and how that might shake up if they need to hit certain requirements of playing certain games. But again, Kevin O'Connor touches on that in the article as well, basically saying that people are confident that they could get deals done because, obviously there's such a huge desire for live sports right now, and the ratings would be great, and everyone would be ready to be tuned in for this basketball, especially if every game matters. And that's what it would be. It would be, 2.5, 3 weeks, 80 games, 4 or 5 games a day, and every game matters. Every game is huge. It has that tournament, feeling to it. Other than, the Bucks are up 3-0 on the Magic, so I'm not even going to bother tuning into this game. The gambling would be really crazy for this. I think what we really want is we want 2 things. We want to see basketball, but we also want to make sure that everything is done in as safe a way as possible. And I think by limiting the amount of teams, limiting this to just 20 teams, it'll be a good way to make sure that, not to kind of limit the essential personnel. I think having, this at Disney World would be absolutely crazy. Just something that, generations from now, people aren't even going to believe that we hosted a playoffs at Disney World. And obviously all the things with safety come first. But assuming we can get all that down and we can get a good agreement in place and we can have daily testing of the players and we can have precautions for what happens if certain people contract COVID-19 and we feel confident moving forward with a proposal to finish the season, I think obviously this is not perfect. We're going to have to tailor it a little bit, tweak it here and there. But I think this general idea of the group stage is really exciting. It's probably the most fun proposal and my favorite proposal that I've heard so far. And I would love to hear more people talking about it, and I would love to see the NBA implement it. So there we go. That is talking about this potential group stage draw for the first round of the NBA playoffs. So let me know what you think of this idea. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, subscribe, all the good stuff that every single YouTuber tells you to do at the end of the video. And hopefully I'll see you again soon making some more videos. See you guys.